There's a small group of people who grew up dialing numbers on rotary phones and later watched the world line up for the first iPhone. Researchers still debate where to place them. Born roughly between 1976 and 1985, they sit at the edge of Generation X, but don't fully identify as millennials either. Around 2014, writers began using the term Xennials to describe this narrow slice of birth years, sometimes even calling it a micro-generation because the window is so precise. And when you look closely at what unfolded during that period of history, you start to understand why it deserves attention. This cohort experienced something unusual, a childhood rooted in analog life and an adulthood shaped almost overnight by digital transformation. As kids, boredom was normal. If you missed your favorite TV show, it was gone. If you didn't memorize a phone number, you simply didn't make the call. Plans were made in advance, and if someone was late, you waited and hoped. Communication was slower, and that slowness shaped patience, trust, and commitment in subtle but powerful ways. Then, just as many of you were stepping into adulthood, the internet stopped being optional. Cell phones became common. Platforms like Friendster appeared, followed by MySpace and later Facebook. Suddenly, there were countless ways to reach someone. Instead of 3 points of contact, home, work, or in person, you had inboxes, direct messages, texts, and notifications multiplying by the year, and you adapted. From a developmental standpoint, timing matters. Research published in Nature Neuroscience shows that the prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for decision-making, adaptability, and complex learning, continues maturing into the mid-20s. That means many Xennials were still neurologically flexible during the digital explosion, young enough to absorb new systems naturally, but old enough to remember life before them. This dual exposure created a kind of psychological bilingualism. You can sit through a dinner without instinctively reaching for your phone, yet you're not overwhelmed by new apps or evolving software. You understand what it felt like to be unreachable for an entire afternoon. At the same time, you don't fear technological change. You've lived on both sides of it. Privacy, too, feels different for this group. Your most awkward teenage moments weren't archived in the cloud. Embarrassing phases faded into memory instead of resurfacing in tagged photos years later. That changes how you relate to your past. Psychological research on autobiographical memory suggests our recollections are dynamic. We revise and reshape them over time. But permanent digital records interrupt that natural editing process. Xennials had formative years before everything became searchable. And just as you were building careers, the global economy collapsed during the Great Recession. Entering the workforce during economic instability can leave lasting marks. Studies on financial stress indicate that early career hardship influences long-term attitudes toward risk, savings, and security. So while you learned to pivot technologically, you may also carry an undercurrent of caution, an awareness that stability can dissolve quickly. Culturally, generational discussions often flatten nuance. We talk about Gen X versus millennials as if everyone in those decades shared identical experiences, but rapid change compresses differences. Being born in 1977 versus 1992 meant growing up in entirely different technological and economic climates. Xennials occupy that hinge point. There's also a social paradox. Many of you grew up with relative independence, coming home to empty houses, solving problems without constant parental oversight. Yet you entered adulthood during a time when digital culture promised connection and collaboration. You learned self-reliance before hyperconnectivity, skeptical yet hopeful, analog in childhood, digital in adulthood. Perhaps what defines this microgeneration most is comfort with contradiction. You can appreciate streaming services while remembering the thrill of browsing a video store. You value constant access to information, yet you know what deep focus felt like before notifications fractured attention.
You don't romanticize the past blindly, but you're aware something intangible shifted. There were losses, the ease of disappearing for a while, the patience built through waiting, the depth of uninterrupted presence. But there were gains, too. Global communities, instant knowledge, creative tools unimaginable decades earlier. If you fall into this cohort, you might sometimes feel slightly out of sync, too old to be fully native to internet culture, too young to reject it outright, suspended between eras. But that in-between space may be your greatest strength. You've already lived through a seismic transition. You know environments can transform rapidly, and that identity doesn't have to fracture when they do. The Xennial experience isn't about superiority, it's about perspective. You witnessed a before and an after, and that vantage point offers insight into how to evolve without abandoning who you are. If this perspective resonates, consider subscribing. And if you'd like to support more deep dives like this, becoming a channel member truly helps. There are more explorations ahead, different subjects, same thoughtful lens. I'll see you in the next one.